Welcome to BRAINWAVES podcast. I'm your host, Ahmad the Great. In today's episode, we dive deep into the fascinating concept in the study of understanding, the hermeneutic loop. This concept is foundational to hermeneutics, the theory and methodology of interpretation. It's especially important when dealing with text, language, and meaning. You may be asking, what exactly is a hermeneutic loop and why should I care about it? Well, if you've ever tried to understand a poem, decode the meaning behind a piece of art, or even interpret someone's cryptic text, you've already engaged with it. Whether you realize it or not, is a mental process that bridges the gap between individual words, sentences, and the larger context that gives them meaning. The hermeneutic loops refer to the cyclical process of interpretation. It's based on the relationship between the parts and the whole. Here's how it works. To understand a text as a whole, you need to interpret its individual parts. But to understand those parts, you need to consider the whole. It's a back and forth process. Let me give you an example. Imagine reading a novel for the first time. You start with chapter 1. But as you progress, you gain a better understanding of the story's themes and the characters. This deeper understanding of the whole novel retroactively changes how you interpret earlier chapters. Then, when you reread chapter 1 with this new perspective, you notice details you missed the first time. This ongoing dialogue between parts and whole is the hermeneutic loop in action. This concept was famously developed in the works of 20th century philosopher Hans-Georg Gadamer, though its roots go back to Friedrich Schleiermacher and Wilhelm Dilthey. To understand the hermeneutic loop fully, we need to look at the historical development of hermeneutics. The term itself originates from the Greek word hermeneuon, which means to interpret or to translate. The name is linked to Hermes, the Greek messenger god, who mediated between the gods and humans. Early hermeneutics focused on interpreting religious texts. For instance, theologians like Augustine of Hippo worked on understanding biblical scriptures. Over time, hermeneutics expanded to cover secular texts and became a broader discipline. Schleiermacher, often called the father of modern hermeneutics, introduced the idea that interpretation requires understanding both the grammatical and psychological aspect of a text. Later, Dilthey emphasized the importance of historical context in understanding meaning. Finally, Gadamer revolutionized hermeneutics with his book Truth and Method. He argued that understanding is not about recovering an author's original intent, but about engaging in a dialogue between the text and the reader. And central to this dialogue is, you guessed it. Let's get practical. Where do we encounter the hermeneutic loop in our everyday lives? First, in reading literature. Take Shakespeare. Take Shakespeare's Hamlet. On your first read, you might focus on Hamlet's soliloquies, but as you progress, you understand the larger themes of revenge, madness, and mortality. Then, when you revisit the soliloquies, they resonate with the richer meaning because you now see them as part of a broader tapestry. Second, learning a new skill. Think about learning a language. Start by learning individual words, then progress to sentences, and eventually understand the conversations. Each new level of understanding allows you to go back and reinterpret earlier lessons with greater clarity. Third, in everyday communication, even in casual conversations, the hermeneutic loop is at play. When someone says, "I'm fine," interpret the words based on their tone. I'm fine. I'm fine. Body language and your broader understanding of the emotional state. All context influences how you interpret the part, the words. The hermeneutic loop raises some profound philosophical questions. Can we ever truly understand something if our interpretation is always shaped by preconceptions? Gadamer would argue that our horizons, our cultural, historical, and personal context shape how we interpret the world. He called this the fusion of horizons, where understanding involves merging our perspective with that of the text or the other person. This also ties into epistemology, the study of knowledge. If our understanding is always shaped by interpretation, is there such thing as objective knowledge? Hermeneutics doesn't necessarily provide definitive answers, but it invites us to think critically about these issues. Of course, the hermeneutic loop isn't without its critics. Some argue that it risks circular reasoning. How can you understand the whole without understanding the parts, and vice versa? Others worry that it prioritizes subjective interpretation over objective analysis. However, proponent counters that this circularity isn't vicious, it's productive. The process of going back and forth depends on understanding rather than undermining it. The hermeneutic loop isn't just for books or conversations. It applies to any system of meaning. For example, science. Researchers form hypotheses, the whole, and test them through experiments, the parts, refining the hypothesis as new data emerges. Art. When viewing a painting, we interpret its elements, color, form, texture, in light of the overall composition and vice versa. History. Historians examine individual events to understand broader trends and then revisit those events with a deeper understanding of the larger historical narrative. So, why does the hermeneutic loop matter? It reminds us that understanding is a process. Whether we are reading a book, interpreting a scientific theory, or trying to understand another person, we are always in dialogue, moving between the details and the bigger picture. I encourage you to think about how you use the hermeneutic loop in your life. The next time you read, learn, or have a deep conversation, notice how your understanding evolves as you engage with the parts and the whole. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the hermeneutic loop. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and share. And remember, this journey to understand is never ending, but that's what makes it exciting. See you next time. Adios.